about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Today we have as our returning guest, economist Andy Sutton. Andy was formerly of the financial community. However, now he's involved with the sole purpose of blowing the whistle on corruption and helping people around the globe become their own advocates. Let's see if we can get him on the screen. Andy, there you are. Welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
How you doing, Joe? Good to be back.
You know what? I'm hanging in there. Let me put it that way. You know, things get as you get older, things get more difficult for some reason. People used to tell me that. I said, don't worry about it. You know, you got to worry about it. Well, I'm glad to be here. It looks like everything seems to be working. This is a miracle in and of itself. And I think today you said you wanted to talk about the modern monetary theory. And what I think is interesting is I try to do some research on it, but all the research that I have found on it, quite frankly, I've listened to videos, read articles on it, and I almost felt stupid because I had no idea what they were talking about. What they said didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. It's like money appears magically, and then this is what you do with it, and this is how the country becomes wealthy. And I go, well, wait a minute. When you say money, do you mean currency, or do you mean something backed up by something physical, something like gold, silver, whatever the may be, you know, maybe. And they never get around to that. They just say, well, money is created, and they go on and they build their case. With all the research that I have done on the modern monetary theory, MMT, as it's abbreviated, I have learned absolutely nothing. Am I missing something really big?
No, actually, modern monetary theory is just a recently coined name for a practice that has been going on for quite some time now. Let's go back to Keynesianism. Back in the 1930s, during the early part of the Depression, the Brits wanted to have a justification for deficit spending. And so they got Keynes to write his book, and he was a highly respected economist, at the time, and his book was received very well, and all was fine and dandy. Government, go spend away, spend till you drop. Well, that's worked out. So what happened next was this idea that, okay, you've mentioned it on the show about 100,000 times. I've talked about it at least another 100,000 times. This idea that Kolakov says we owe 240, 200, whatever it is. It's never going to get paid. That's the bottom line. So how do we keep this whole thing going? The idea is, so modern, you could call it modern Keynesianism actually, is the following. You print as much money or create as much money on the keyboard as you need. But there's a catch. Only the governments and certain select corporations have access to this new money. And what happens is, so say the government wants to build, say they want to redo the whole interstate system. Now, everybody's been talking about infrastructure and all that, and the interstates are in fairly good shape, but everybody knows what they are, so we'll use them. Let's say they want to do that, and they estimate that it's going to cost, I don't know, I'm just going to pull a number out of the air, $15 trillion. Every mile of every interstate in the country, and maybe connecting some that ought to be connected, whatever. So say it's $15 trillion. So the government magically has access to this $15 trillion because they can't borrow it anymore. The only thing they can do is have the Fed monetize it, which means that the government would issue bonds, the Fed would buy the bonds and pay with currency created from nothing. It's robbery. So that's the only real thing. The Chinese aren't going to lend us $15 trillion. I don't think the Chinese have $15 trillion. They got a problem of their own. Same with Japan. Those are our two biggest creditors outside the Fed. So what happens is you create all this new money from nothing, mind you, and the government gets access to it. So it bids out this job of rebuilding the interstates. And let's say 10 firms get the whole job. It'd be many more than that, but let's keep it simple. Let's say 10 firms get the job. They're going to redo all the interstates in the country. So the government's obviously got to pay them. And they've got to go out and buy the raw materials. So you're thinking, okay, well, how is this any different? The inflation is going to eventually find its way down to the poor slob at the bottom of the pile. But here's the thing, it doesn't. Not under this new modern monetary theory. What happens is as soon as it gets to the corporations and starts working its way down, it is taxed back out of the system, or it will be taxed back out of the system at a much higher rate than it is being done right now. Because right now they're not creating $15 trillion to do an interstate project. So that's how you keep it out of. Remember, what's necessary for a hyperinflation? You need a growing money supply and you need a wage price spiral, right?
Right.
Wages have to, like Weimar Germany, the people would take their money in wheelbarrows and they got paid in the morning and they would shop at noon because by afternoon the prices were up. Again, that's how quick it was happening. So to stop that, you tax the money back out of the system before it gets to the little guys. So what happens now is you've bid up the price of concrete, right? Because you're going to use concrete, asphalt, all these different materials, stone, whatever for this interstate. But, Joe Cristiano in Tulsa decides that he wants to concrete his driveway. You're never going to get a concrete driveway because you can't afford it. Why can't you afford it? Because these guys have used this funny money to bid up the prices, but none of that money ever made it down to the bottom of the pile. So you can't compete. You're competing against the government, which is the ultimate bidder that has an unlimited supply of unlimited and totally worthless money, currency, by which to do their bidding. This is MMT in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So what happens is it basically squeezes the middle class into nothing, which is the whole plan, obviously, all along. The rest, the ones that are on welfare and government payout programs, they don't really care because they will continue to receive, their payments and so forth, and they're not building concrete driveways anyway. But it's going to basically drive up the prices, but not the wages. So you can't have the spiral. But here's the problem. The government's going to bid itself up. So throughout the course of this interstate project, the price of concrete is just going to continue to rise and rise and rise and rise as you get these 10 players are just basically commandeering the whole thing. The whole supply of concrete is getting commandeered. So the first time it's going to be 15 trillion to do this project. Now, what's going to happen when they decide to start another project that needs concrete? Well, now it's not going to be 15 trillion. Now it's going to be whatever, some number higher. So you're going to create a hyperinflation that way. Here's the problem with this. And here's why it has an end game also, because the dollar is still being used internationally. So there still is demand for dollars, although that demand is starting to wane a little bit as countries cut deals to go off the dollar. And we've talked about those too. So the dollar is still used internationally. So if you trash the value of the dollar by, doing this mass printing, it's not even a monetization. Because if the Treasury is not selling bonds to get this money, then it doesn't even go on the national debt. So it's a tricky system, but it's basically Keynesianism on steroids. There's nothing new under the sun here. You're still talking about money that's backed by nothing. You're still talking about, this phony money chasing scarce resources and driving the prices up. What this is all about, Joe, this is about, first of all, perpetuating this idiotic system. And secondly, it's about access. Who has access to what? So, like I pointed out, you're not going to have access to a concrete driveway. What does that do to the housing market? It makes houses basically unaffordable unless you want to make them out of, unless you want to pour, clay foundations or something like that and use something other than concrete. You might have to go to using block. You see where I'm going. So the government's going to bid up the prices of all these items, and it's going to make them inaccessible to your average, working stiff, because the money is being taxed out at the corporation level. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what they're conspiring to do.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it. People have marveled at how can the national debt be $22 trillion and this and that and all the other thing and all this debt's out there, and you haven't seen prices go through the roof. That's because the inflation has been sequestered. It hasn't been taxed. Where has it gone? It's gone into asset bubbles, which the public, because they haven't been educated on economics, the public views this as a good thing. Hey, the price of my house just doubled in the last 5 years. I know a guy down the street wrote a book called Retire on the House. By the way, that book was a bestseller in 2005. You can buy a copy on Amazon for 98 cents today. That's how much it's worth.
Yeah.
And it's actually entitled Retire on the House, an asset bubble. The stock market, look at that, 26,000 point Dow again. It's an asset bubble. $15 trillion in treasury bonds outstanding. It's an asset bubble. So it's not the inflation necessarily, it's where it goes. That has been the point used to deceive people up to this point. But now they're starting to even run out of places to stick the inflation there. So we'll just go back to, we'll just tax it out of the system and recycle it. We'll just keep recycling it through, and the government can run as many projects as it wants. It can do as much spending as it wants, and there's no hyperinflationary wage price spiral, so the dollar remains relevant for all this period of time.
Yeah.
Here's another problem.
The people that I have listened to who talked about this and the articles that I've read, they don't start from the beginning. They don't define what they're talking about. They just say, money is created and goes into the system, and they don't say what happens to the value of the currency. They don't distinguish currency from money. And the only time they do is they talk about the antiquated gold standard that we should have left a long time ago, and thankfully we got off of it in 1971. This is their pitch on it, and so now we have this these avenues to take, which would help stimulate the economy, but it's not. It just allows the government to spend more and more money that we don't have. And they never talk about the debt and how the debt's being paid off. And they never say, well, since there's more money in the system, each unit of money is worth less money in and of itself. So they make it sound, if it was that good, why didn't we do this 2,000 years ago? I mean, did it take us 2,000 years to think of this?
No, and that's just it. It's not a good thing. You went from a gold standard in the early 70s to this now, where you're basically rehashing and kicking over the rock, digging out old canes, and putting a few more layers of lipstick on that pig and trying to sell it as being something that's worthwhile and people ought to be embracing. Well, let's look at how this is packaged. Again, policy, not policy makers. It's all about everything has to be converted over to green now. So this is hugely expensive. I've seen estimates as high as $100 trillion to do what has been in some of the proposals that have come out. And obviously, we don't have $100 trillion. And this is where this originates from. Well, although it could really be an issue of the chicken and the egg, which came first? The excuse to debase the money or debase the money because of the excuse.
Yeah.
Take your pick on that one. But that's kind of the package that MMT has been stuffed into. Well, since we're putting it into a policy now we have to give it a name. So we gave it a name. Modern makes it sound like, oh, it's advanced. It's not. It's another ripoff. It's the same ripoff with a few more bells and whistles added to it. It's not going to help the average person at all. Well, it's going to help the government because they're going to give everybody a job. Yes, and we did found a socialist republic. Franklin told us that, didn't he? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That was some other place. That wasn't America. We just created a republic, not a socialist republic. I'm sorry. But we're not allowed to use that word anymore because now that offends people. And, when you use that word in blogs, then your blog gets hacked and taken down. It is becoming very, how should I say, dicey, Joe, to actually even talk about this stuff that's going on anymore. Because here's the thing. The people that are pushing this and the entities that are pushing it, everybody knows it's baloney. There's no arguing there. They know it's garbage. But they've got to keep that perception because that's where the dollar gets its value from. It's not backed by gold. It's not this. It's not that. For the longest time, they said, oh, the dollar's backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Well, nobody has any faith in the U.S. government anymore, so we can't use that. So it's based on perception. You can walk into the store with a paper bill and get yourself a soda and a candy bar. Why? Because it's perceived that the guy who runs that store can take that same paper ticket and go and buy whatever it is that he or she needs.
Right.
That's all. That's the value. It's perception.
Yeah.
There's no difference between a Federal Reserve note and monopoly money, although actually there is really, because monopoly money is not debt. The Federal Reserve note is.
Right.
Now that's another whole discussion.
Yeah.
So this is what they're doing. This is how how do you think they're going to pay for free college or free housing or free whatever that the government comes up with that they want to give out to buy votes, curry favor, and do whatever? Well, this is how they're going to do it. They've been doing it, so now they've laid out. The only thing they haven't been doing yet, the only piece of this hasn't been the tax end, where they remove the money from the lower tier or the middle tier of the economic structure and cycle it back up to the government, which will now be sitting at the top as the ultimate bidder. So where the Fed, is the buyer of last resort, the ultimate buyer, now the government becomes, under MMT, the optimal and ultimate bidder for products, services, what have you. What does this do to the economy? Do you hear have any of the articles you read talked about what this is going to do to the economy?
Oh, it's all been favorable. I mean, it's going to stimulate the economy because
right.
good jobs are being created. People will have money in their pockets. Retail will rebound. You name it, it's all good. There's not one, and they never bring up one negative, not one. I mean, there's always a negative to something. I mean, if I went out and bought myself a Lamborghini, I can say what a wonderful car it is, but then the negative is I can't afford to make the payments. There's always a dark side to every any action that we take, or negatives and positive, but there's never any negatives. And that's what drives me nuts, is that all we hear is how wonderful it is. Then why didn't we do it 6,000 years ago?
Yeah, exactly. Well, then that's one of the clues. Everybody thought, well, how do you figure out what fake news is? How can you tell the difference between what's real and what's fake? When you hear that about a proposal or a practice or a philosophy or whatever, and all you hear is the positive and you hear no negative, you're not getting told the whole story. It's the bottom line, because you're right. Everything you do, economics has this. It's kind of like a fictitious enigma called Pareto efficiency. Pareto efficiency states that an action that is taken that has an upside for one person without having a downside to somebody else. So in this world, MMT is completely Pareto efficient because it's all upside and there's no downside for anybody. Actually, it's the opposite. It's all downside for everybody, unless you're talking about, the government and, these select corporations that are going to be, part of that inner circle that get to partake in this, because they'll have the paper tickets to go out and bid up the prices of goods that everyday regular folks are going to use. And what they'll probably do in conjunction with this, Joe, because remember, you got to keep the perception up. I would think that you're going to see a significant hike in the minimum wage when this whole thing rolls into effect. So when they start actually practicing all of MMT as it's been laid out, I think a big part of that's going to be a minimum wage increase to keep the illusion up that, hey, we have purchasing power down here at the bottom. And because that's what it's all about, purchasing power. The currency's garbage, it's weak, you don't have any purchasing power. So how do you give people a little boost or help them maintain purchasing power? You shuffle more paper tickets their way. So I think that's what's going to happen along with this. I think it's going to be a doubling, honestly. I think you're going to see the national minimum wage double. And I don't think that's too much of a jump either, because it's already been done in some smaller areas, just not the whole country. But that's what I see coming out of this. And then, of course, very rapidly, prices will wipe out any purchasing power that might be gained and things like that. So if you're a little guy at the bottom, the only real defense you have against MMT is when you get your raise, spend it right away. And I mean quickly.
Yeah.
But don't go out and buy junk. Buy stuff that you need, but do it before the prices have a chance to increase. Because if they start creating that kind of money, that we're talking about here, I mean, major infrastructure overhauls, converting every power plant to green technology, that means every house has to be rolled over. That means every car, all of it, every gas station. They're not going to have gas stations anymore. They're going to be power stations. So you're going to have all this money that's going to be spent to do all this. If this is what it's basically, if you look at the Agenda 21 program that the UN rolled out, before the turn of the century, that's basically what this is. Now, does America need an infrastructure overhaul? Certainly. Our infrastructure right now, to my knowledge, is not even hardened against an electromagnetic pulse that could come from the sun.
Right.
So we could see our power grid get fried by something that happens not as an act of war, but just something that happens from our sun. So yeah, it needs an upgrade badly, but we don't have any money. We're broke. We went $22 trillion into debt to fight wars in the Middle East, to have deficit government spending, to give out free this, free that, free everything. What do we have to show for all that debt? That's what I'd like one of these clowns to tell us, is what do we have to show for all this debt?
Well, we have a second-class nation now. I mean, we used to be first class. Now we're second class, and we're sliding to third class.
Well, here's the kicker: when globalization started, when that term started getting kicked around, it was probably like 94, 95. The selling point for globalization was, we're not going after America. We're going to bring the rest of the world up to the standard of living of Americans. Has that happened? No. The whole point of that was to bring American standard of living down to that of the rest of the world.
Right.
it was just to create a lowest common denominator, not a highest common denominator. And if you read the white papers that came out at the time, from all these think tanks, I mean, they laid it bare. I mean, nobody really hid it. It just wasn't talked about, at 6 o'clock in the evening on network news. And so for most people, that means it didn't exist, unfortunately. So a lot of this is part of the Agenda 21 program that you didn't really hear a lot about. It kind of got kicked off a little bit. And, then we kind of went to a bunch of wars, and now it looks like we're trying to lie our way into another war, down in South America. That's going to cost who knows how much. So you see, this just I'm not seeing an upside here. Yeah. And if we're going green, then what do we care about Venezuela's oil? Right?
Right.
I mean, if that's our plan, if that's the big game plan here, is to take everything green, then who gives a rip about how much oil Venezuela has, and why are we interested in it? We shouldn't be. Joe, this whole thing's a lie. It's very obvious. But as soon as you start asking those kinds of questions, we've reached a point in the ball game where you're going to get censored. You're going to get the door slammed in your face. Whether people have been relying on social media to try and spread the word about a lot of this stuff, and they're finding that they're no longer welcome anymore. So,
when they speak about this subject on television and news media, they reference that most of the young voters, the college students, 40%, are leaning towards voting for someone like Bernie Sanders. Excuse me, Bernie Sanders, and they agree with these programs that they're talking about, that we're talking about, and they think this is the way to make America great again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to blame the school system, because the school system is controlled by the government, and if the government taught the Constitution, taught free enterprise, taught individuality, taught freedom, etc., all the basics, if they taught the very, very basics, there wouldn't be one person with a half a brain saying my conclusion from all of this, after learning about the Constitution, about why America was great, why we were different. The conclusion is now we need this modern monetary theory. In fact, everyone would reject it, but they're not. 40% are embracing it 100%. So that's telling you that the government has done an excellent job of indoctrinating our children in government schools, and not allowing them to think of what the alternative was, and not asking them to study the Constitution and why our country became so great, and why we broke away from the European empires. That's immaterial now. It's all that we're behind, and we can find a better way of doing it, and we're gonna be at the forefront of breaking through, without realizing that what we're doing is we're going to be just like the Soviet Union was. That's where we're going. We're heading for the Soviet Union.
Economy.
Yeah, it's command economy. What's the difference between a program such as this and what's happening in Russia today? Russia is embracing more the free enterprise system. They're becoming more free enterprise, and we are becoming more socialistic. And no one is saying this. Not on mainstream government, mainstream television would say this. I mean, that would be blasphemy. But we're not saying anything. It just drives me nuts.
Here's the thing I've noticed too. A lot of people, blame the schools, and maybe that's right, maybe it's not. Here's the thing, though. If you talk to, at least around here, kids that go to private schools, they have the same beliefs. So even if I think honestly, it's mass marketing that's more to be responsible for, and the fact that parents they don't take the time to educate their kids. It's not the state's responsibility to take care of children and educate them. Ultimately, it's the parents' responsibility, but the parents don't want to be bothered. And I think, and not in every case, I don't want to sound like I'm painting everybody into a corner here, because obviously there are many, many parents that do educate, but I'm talking in general terms. We're not seeing enough of that, and I think that's why, you're down these rabbit trails, and things like MMT are allowed to flourish, is just because there's an overall lack of understanding. So if the parents don't understand it, how are they going to get the kids to understand it? If Madison Avenue and its glitz, glamour, and advertising has conned 75% of the population out of its common sense, what do we see what I'm saying? We kind of got our backs against the wall here, and this stuff it's not coming, it's here. This is one of the ways that totalitarian states work. They don't tell you they're going to start doing something. They actually do it for a while, or maybe parts of it for a while. Then they tell you, this is what we're going to do. And that's exactly what is going on with modern monetary theory. This has been, in some facets of it, have been going on for at least a decade, more, you could argue. But it never had a name. Inflation has been sequestered. When did we had a tech bubble in 2000? When was the bubble before the tech bubble? That was really the first big one. So 20 years almost, this has been going on. We pushed it into asset bubbles. We had a blowout. We had a recession. Then we pushed it into housing and personal debt. We got it in government debt, stocks, housing again in some areas. So this has been going on. What they haven't implemented yet is the taxing portion, the recycling. That hand that reaches out, grabs all those new phony dollars and pulls them back so they can be used again. That's that part we have not seen rolled out yet. And like I said, when it does, I believe you're going to see the minimum wage double. It might even triple, which is going to be awfully interesting for the people who are now making $14, $15, $16 an hour. What are you going to do with them? They're going to become minimum wage workers. What's that going to do to businesses when they have to pay? McDonald's has to pay a kid $15 an hour to stand at a register. You know what they're doing? They're putting in those kiosks where you can order your meal from a computer, and they have a little swiper there. You can swipe your credit card or put your phone up to it and pay your bill. And they're already replacing human labor in anticipation. The companies know what's coming. So just watch what they do. And that's going to give you a lot of insight into what is coming. All right, so why would they do that? Well, are they just being, are they giving up on the personal experience? Well, no. Do they not like teenagers anymore? No, that's not true either. They're preparing for this increase in the national minimum wage. That's why they're doing it.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that when if I want to learn something about what's going on in a free enterprise manner, I have to find a program like RT. RT is Russia Television, and that's where Max Kaiser, for example, and people like him, they're on that channel, and they're espousing the free enterprise system and the harm that socialism does, and it's on Russian television. But yet you won't hear those people on mainstream television, whether it be Fox, whether it be MSNBC, whether it be any of those. And it just boggles my mind that I can watch, if I want to hear about the free enterprise system and the damage that socialism does, I have to watch the Russian television set, the program. But you don't hear that on American TV. And no one's screaming about that. I'm the only one.
No, you're absolutely right. And here's the kicker. RT isn't even Russian state television. It's not the state news agency in Russia. That's TASS. So,
that's right.
You've got a non-government. I'm sure they've got their biases too, just like everybody else does. That's the nature of the beast. The thing I like about them is, when there's hypocrisy going on here or in Europe, for example, Australia, England, places like that. They kind of yank the pants down on it,
Right.
which has value. Then you get to find out a little bit about what's going on. Of course, all that's fake, though. I'm sorry, I forgot. It's just, see how ridiculous this is getting. So people are being isolated. You've got a new monetary system being foisted upon us. You have basically, for lack of a better term, a new political ideology that's being foisted upon the people. And it's like this hybrid. It's not all socialism. It's not all capitalism. It's not all communism, but it's like a combination of the three, depending where you're looking. And right away people are going to say, well, you can't say the U.S. is communist. I can say it practices some communist principles.
Yes,
absolutely.
Right.
Look at the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. That's basically the gold standard, for lack of a better term, of what communism is. And look at the 10 of the planks that we practice here in this country. So I don't want to hear any baloney about, well, you can't say that. That's unpatriotic. No, it's not. Telling the truth is patriotic. Being American is patriotic, not belonging to some political party that couldn't give anything about America. Neither of these groups care about the Constitution. They swear to uphold it and then promptly go and do exactly otherwise. And I don't even like to talk about those groups at all. But here's the thing. That's where the policies are coming from. And eventually it's gotten to the point now, if you want to talk about policy, you almost have to talk about, at least in generic terms, the groups that are pushing this. But here's the thing. What's the difference? There isn't one. Ostensibly, it's the same thing. So, looking at, what's going on with Venezuela, probably another war. North Korea, that pot is simmering. You've got Russia, China, Iran, Turkey. Who am I missing? Pakistan and India are going at it.
Syria,
Syria, yeah, I
throw
forget that.
in there, right?
Syria,
You can throw almost any country in there. Well, we're starting. There's something offbeat
we're
going
gonna have
on.
to start getting. We're gonna have to get another whiteboard here and start keeping score, because I mean, really, and that's what we've gotten for a good part of our $22 trillion that we're in debt as of this moment. Because that's the public, that's the number of people understand. If I said 240, they would say, well, that's wrong. The debt clock says 22, so we'll stick with 22.
But what is the average American to do? The average American really does not know what to do. If they had extra money, they don't know how to handle it. They don't know where to put it. They don't know where the danger signs are. They know nothing about inflation. It seems that they're all doing the wrong thing, but they don't know that. And no one's telling them otherwise. The financial community is just mouthing off like everything is fine and just keep it coming. Keep that money flowing in,
Oh, yeah.
And no one realizes that. And I think, like Peter Schiff said recently, he said, this will not be the worst depression since the Great Depression of 1929. It'll be the greatest depression, including the crash of 1929. And he said, there's no way out of it. We have never been financially in such dire straits. There's no way other than printing our way out, totally debasing our currency, losing the status as the world's reserve currency, which we should have a long time ago. And
right.
everything is going to be a reset, and everyone's going to be poorer for it. But no one is mentioning that. No one is talking about that. They just talk about new programs that cost more money that we don't have, and somehow we print it out of thin air, and it works, and we become wealthier and better for it. I don't understand it. You need to help me with that.
That's exactly right. If you have extra money, you can just look at any debt chart student loan debt, credit card debt, auto loans, home equity lines of credit. They're all going up. People need to stop. People need to stop doing that first, because when this whole MMT thing really gets rolled out, it is not going to be a good thing to owe people money. I believe we're going to end up, and it may take quite a while for this part to happen. We're going to end up in, for lack of a better term, a neo-feudalist type system where you had lords, vassals, serfs, and slaves, and you had debtors. And if you owed money and you had beaten, didn't pay, you went to jail. That's how they used to do things,
right?
During those times, during that. I find it ironic. Most lending companies now call people who make their payments on time work calls. It's just not a good time to owe people money. So if there's extra, pay something off. If there's not, then you know what? And we stink at doing this as Americans, because this is where that marketing comes back into play. We've been taught, you're an American, it's your right, you deserve it, you're entitled to it, and you're entitled to it 10 minutes ago.
Right. Yeah.
So we'll buy it. That has to stop.
The problem is I come from a family that came from the old country, came here, struggled, to make ends meet. My mother used to give me, I remember when I lived in East Harlem, New York, and we lived on top of Morris's grocery store. My mother would give me so many cents. I mean, never a dollar. We never had a dollar, but it would be like 45 cents or 60 cents or whatever. And she would have a whole list of things to buy. One pickle, it was it was exact. 2 ears of corn and whatever. And God forbid I was off. All hell broke loose. And you know what? And I still carry that to this day, Andy. I'm still the same way. Even my sons, they say, Dad, why are you that way? You have plenty of money. Why don't you spend it? I said, no, you don't. You don't make money to spend it. You make money to invest. You invest your money. You live modestly, and they find it so difficult to say, well, I don't have to live modestly anymore, but I still do. I don't do anything any differently than I did when I lived in Harlem. What my mother gave me 60 cents to go shopping. I do the same thing today. I go there and I take a couple of dollars out and say, I can buy this and that, and I get some change, and I pay cash. And every time I go shopping for my wife, I think of when I was a kid. And I'm doing the same thing. And I said, unfortunately, more of America should be doing that. I know I'm kind of...
Yeah, we lost that.
Yeah. And it's a shame that we've lost... This instant gratification is killing us, They come out with a new car. We need to have the new car. We had to buy a new car recently because Aaron got smacked in the back with she was at a stoplight, and the car behind her forgot to stop and totaled her car. And unfortunately, it wasn't worth much. And so we had to go out and buy a new car because she needs it for work. And so we have a little car loan now. And that's very unusual. I can pay for cash, but I don't want to sell any of my stock. So, we have a car loan. And that's very rare for me to have a loan outstanding, even for a car, When my car went a couple of years ago, the engine blew up. And I bought myself a 2002 Toyota Sienna for $5,400, which was a lot more than I wanted to spend. And you had to hear my sons, what's the matter with you? Why don't you go out and buy a new Corvette? And I guess, we have the old world and the new world. And the new world is going to find out that it doesn't work this way. It's going to be very, very painful. And when it happens and you're not prepared for it, you're going to be left out, and there's going to be very, very, very few people who are going to survive. Survive well in this economy. Am I sounding too doomsdayish, or do I make sense to you?
No, the only thing that I'm not certain about is the timing, and I can't answer how that's going to play out, and neither can anybody else, for that matter. I am inundated, as I'm sure you are, with these, I call them fright sites, these emails that have these, dire warnings.
Oh yeah, I get 3 or 4 every day, at least 3 or 4, maybe 5.
Yeah, exactly. In the weeks ahead, the U.S. dollar is going to lose its reserve.
Right.
They don't know that.
Yeah.
That's marketing.
Yeah.
That's somebody who has no knowledge of economics, finance, business, geopolitics, whatever. It's a marketer that's sitting down to draw an advertisement that's going to suck people in to paying $49 to find out how to survive the biggest catastrophe that the world has seen economically. And my opinion on this, it will not happen in one day. It will not happen in a week, a month, or even a year. It's been happening. It started when? Well, that's arguable. It's been going on at least, at a minimum, since 1913. Definitely, for sure, since 1971. That's when we divorced ourselves from the gold standard. Right. So that's what that was. See, we agreed after World War II to use the dollar basically as a reserve currency, but it was going to be backed by gold. There was an agreement. It was called Bretton Woods. Right. We violated it. And people just kind of glaze over that. Well, whatever. No, we violated that because of the excesses of the 60s.
Right.
When we started all these social welfare programs. And wait, social welfare? Yeah. People need to pull out old dictionaries and look up some of these words like communism, socialism, command economy, fascism, these types of things, because they get thrown around so much on television and nobody really knows what it is. Communism and socialism, those are economic definitions. Socialism, the government controls the majority of the factors of production, which are land, labor, capital, and technology. Yeah. Communism was where the government controls virtually all of them. Yeah. So you go back to the Soviet Union, that was communism, economically speaking. And then they had a whole bunch of, humanitarian type situations as well. And unfortunately, people tag that as being communism. Oh, you got thrown in a gulag or you went to Siberia. That's not communism. That's just a totalitarian government at work. Right. Communism is we tell you how many rows of corn to grow. We tell you how many people you can use to raise that corn, gather that corn, harvest that corn, and then we tell you how much you're allowed to pay them. That's communism. Yeah. Socialism is just backing off of that a little bit, basically. Yeah. Well, we'll let you make some choices.
Yeah. Universal health care. Well,
exactly.
No one knows that. Recognizes the fact that health care in the United States was very affordable at one time. When the government got involved, prices went through the roof, and now no one could afford it anymore. And I have friends who are relatively wealthy that don't have. They're wealthy, and they, but they don't have. They didn't work for a large corporation where they had a health care plan. I was fortunate. I worked for Royal Dutch Shell, and they closed the location down. And as a gift to all the employees at that location, they said, we're going to provide you, you can continue on the company health care plan. And that's the only reason why I'm not absolutely destitute, because I've used that and it's worked out very well for me. But I have friends that, they pay mega thousands a year. And they can afford it, mega thousands a year for regular things. And one of my friends, his wife has a pre-existing condition, and it costs a fortune, to keep her going. And so
that cracks me up. You can't be denied because of it, but they can charge you an arm and both legs.
That's right. And if we just went for a free market system, once again, prices would come down. People say, well, we have to make it more affordable, so we need government to get involved and make it available.
We need government to get the heck out of it.
Get the heck out of it, yeah.
It's the same thing with college, Joe. You look at college. Everybody's yammering now about college. Well, why is it so expensive? Gee, maybe it could be because the government guaranteed an oversupply of students with guaranteed student loans. It was the same thing. College was became an anybody does it. Now we're still, and here's some good news. So you can't say that Andy Sutton is all negative on Liberty Talk Radio. We are seeing a lot of schools even starting to urge their students to think twice. Do you really want to go to college? What are you interested in doing? Maybe you would be better off going through this apprenticeship or that shorter program or whatever, and skip the college. That is happening, and that's good news, because those are the conversations that need to be taking place. People, you don't just spend $150,000. Sadly, you have to look at it and say, well, you know what's at the end of this road for me? If a minimum wage job is at the end of this $150 or $150,000 highway, I think I'll pass. I'll collect like $200 and pass go and do something else or go somewhere else. That sort of thing. So those conversations are taking place now, which is very good. What they need to do is expand into some of these other areas. What's that war going to get us? What is this social program going to get us? What is this policy going to get us? And not the one-sidedness. Let's hear it all. Let's hear both sides. There's good and bad for all of it. Even the good policies that are proposed have negatives. Everything does. It's just the way it works. It is very hard to make everybody or most everybody better off without making at least some group worse off. And that's one of the principles of economics. It's very difficult to do that. And anybody who says, well, we're going to level the playing field with a tax, that's not efficient. That's warfare against innovation, really, when you think about it. Let's hammer the companies or the individuals, because small business does quite a bit of innovation too. So let's hammer the innovators and disincentivize them. Then where are we going to be? Where are we going to be if that happens? But that's what a lot of these policies point to. We're going to disenfranchise the very people that could help make this country better down the road. We're gonna make it to the point where they just throw in the towel and do something else.
I have to ask you one last question, Andy, because we're well out of time. We can go on for hours, and I love this, but I'd like to continue again next week. Okay, about this time, if you're available, we'll do this again. Okay, but
that sounds like a plan.
I don't see us going in the right direction. I don't see a very positive outcome, and I see also with this a lot of poverty, and I'm very, very concerned because when the nation becomes poor, people feel they have nothing to lose by doing things that they normally wouldn't do, and that bothers me. I have friends who have left the country. I mean, they've moved to Puerto Rico, Ecuador, you name it. They're out. They're saying, I don't want to be around when it hits the fan. And they're that's stupid. Believe me, they're not stupid. They're accomplished people. They just don't like it, and they're not doomsday people or anything like that. They're business people. They said, no, there's no future for me here. And anyway, I just wanted to leave you on that high note. So
there are plenty of examples. Just look at Europe, where all the austerity has come into play. There's constant strife there, and I have people that I email with and talk to on a fairly regular basis in a lot of those places, and what we see is very sanitized. We are not seeing what's really going on in a lot of these countries. It's quite bad in a lot, especially in the cities, in a lot of these countries where the social net was there, and then it basically they pulled the rug out from under the people.
I see us as being Europe. Actually, we're turning into Europe, and that's unfortunate. All right, you want to make just a last comment or closing comment?
I would just urge people to continue to have the conversations, especially if you have kids. How are they going to find their way in this world? What kind of jobs can't be outsourced? Do they need to go to college? And then translate and transfer those discussions over to other financial decisions as well.
Yeah.
It's not just college, the car, the house, that sort of thing. And if you have money, get out of some debt. It is not a good time to owe people money.
Right. Yeah. Well, Andy, thank you so much. And I hope we can do this next Wednesday evening or whatever day is convenient for you. Yep. Whatever's convenient, we'll be in contact with you, and whichever time is convenient for you, we'll arrange it somehow. Okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much, Andy. Appreciate you being on our show. Folks, this is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. Stay well. Stay tuned.